Hi, I'm Tony Levin, and I've been asked to say a little bit about myself and what I've been doing and what I'm going to be doing. I've been a bass player for a long time. Sometimes I say that I've been playing bass since the earth was cooling, which is just about true. And I started in classical. I was a classical bassist growing up in Boston, and then I really aimed at playing in orchestras. Went to school at Eastman School of Music and joined the Rochester Philharmonic, and was really on a path to keep doing that when I changed direction drastically and started playing jazz. And after I think 2, 3, 4 years playing jazz, I switched to rock, where I found I was more comfortable than with either classical or jazz. And I still listen a lot to classical and love it, but I don't play it. I don't have the upright anymore, although I have an electric upright, and they wouldn't want that in an orchestra. So after school, I played around in Rochester where I was living, and then I had a chance to move to New York, where I joined a spectacularly unsuccessful band called Aha! The Attack of the Green Slime Beast. I doubt if you've heard of it. We only did 2 shows. And there I was in New York, and I kind of fell into studio work. The studio session musician situation was very different then than it is now. There was a ton of work. There was no shortage of bassists or musicians, but there was always room for more to get work. So even though I didn't particularly want the work, I wanted to play in a rock band, I fell into doing more and more sessions. And after a few years, and I'm talking about back in the 70s, I was quite successful doing records and doing jingles. And they weren't the kind of records that I would choose to do. They were mass-produced records where they didn't really, I'll put it this way, they didn't care in those days for that kind of record what bass player they got. They would just send in for a list of names. And so if I did, it was more of a craft, I would say, than an art, playing those bass parts. So I kind of liked it, but I was craving to go out on the road and play live. And through doing a lot of recordings, of course, I got to meet make connections with a lot of rock bands and rock players. And as soon as I had a chance to go out on the road, I did. And in those days, that meant giving up your studio career, because you really had to be there for short notice calls and things like that. So since, I don't know when, I would say since the mid-70s or late 70s, I considered myself more of a touring rock player than a studio player. I still do quite a few records when I can, when I'm home. Nowadays, more than half of the records I do are done by sending files over the internet, done from my home studio, but sometimes, thankfully, I'm in a studio with other guys. Let's see, through luck, there's a lot of luck in everybody's career, in any field, but especially I think in music, and through a lot of luck I've met and played with great musicians, and I've got to play with really special artists. So at some point in my doing records, I got to play with Peter Gabriel, whom I didn't even know about on that first album, and we hit it off very well, and ever since I've toured with him. And on that same session I met Robert Fripp, who later asked me to make a long story short, later asked me to join King Crimson, which I've been in off and on ever since, and still consider that I'm in it. King Crimson is not touring this year, but I hope we will in the future. Basses, after leaving the upright, I got a Fender bass. Actually, I'll only tell a short anecdote about when I was playing in Rochester. I was playing upright, and a jazz band came through. Can't remember the band, and I'm thinking of the guy's name, and the guy was playing a Fender Precision, and I didn't know what it was. And I was kind of a kid. I went up after the show and said, "What's that, and where can I get one?" And interestingly, he said, "Oh, it's a Fender Precision," and he said, "It's an old one. You don't want to get a new one, you want to get an old one." This is a long time ago, in the 60s, that he was saying that. And at that time, an old one was cheaper than a new one. And he said, what you want to do is go to New York City and go to Dan Armstrong's store and ask for a used Precision. They'll have a few of them around, and it'll cost around $180, which he was right, it is what it cost. At that time, a new one was $200. I remember those numbers. So I played Fender bass for a long time. Very lucky to that's still in the back of my mind, is what's the name of that Andy Muson was the bass player, who was in the band was Jackie and Roy that I saw. Thank you, Andy, wherever you are, for suggesting that I get a used Fender bass when it was a cheap instrument. And then quite a few years later, after a number of albums, a friend of mine, Joel DeBartolo, a bass player, suggested that I try Music Man, which was a new bass, and he kind of really, it took some convincing to get me to even try it, but he said, you're going to like it, it's got more bass, more low end, which was, in those days, more low end was getting onto records, and I switched sorry, I didn't switch, I tried a Music Man Stingray 4-string, and right away I liked it. I put down the Fender and never played the Fender again. I played that one Music Man 4-string for a really long time, and after a few years I got it locked into a relationship with Music Man, the company, and I think I visited them once. At that time the company made, it wasn't Ernie Ball, it was Music Man, it was called. Leo Fender, though, had left at that point. But I didn't bother. They asked me if I wanted a second bass, and I didn't see any reason to have one. And then later, when Ernie Ball took over Music Man and changed things a little bit, they approached me about the instrument, and I started to become more interested in the other options they have. And through the years, they've made subtle and some not so subtle, but mostly subtle improvements on the instrument. So it's an unusual example as instruments go, where it's got better through the years. The vintage ones, the old ones are still great, but the new ones do everything the vintage one, sonically they do everything the old ones did, and they do more. And somewhere around, I think, 89, I started playing the 5-string instead of the 4-string. I still think the 4-string sounds great, just in my world I can only carry so many basses, and the more versatile it is, the better, so I tend to bring along the 5-string. Through the years I've played a number of other basses too. I'm very interested in some of them, and some of them I play, even as recently as this week I was on tour playing the NS electric upright bass, which is something like the acoustic bass I started on, and a lot of fun, and very flexible, because I could pluck it and I could play it with a bow, even in rock situations like King Crimson. I like kind of bowing with a fuzz tone. So I play a lot of the NS electric bass, and the other instrument I play a lot of is the Chapman stick. I don't know how much I should explain it, but it's got bass strings, and mostly I play the bass side of it. It's got guitar strings. They're very versatile and very unusual, and ideal for me in progressive rock situations where coming up with an unusual part is an important thing for me, or an unusual sound, especially in a subtle way, an unusual sound. And I think if I think about what's coming up for me, a lot of touring is coming up, but the only album that's about to come out that's new for me is my new band, Stickmen, it's called. It's because it's with me and another stick player, Michael Bernier, and the King Crimson drummer, Pat Mastelotto. It's a trio. We've been touring together for, I think, 2 years now. Finally are ready to release our solo CD, which will be, it's still a few months away, so I'm not sure where it'll be available, but most likely on the web at my website, TonyLevin.com, and probably at Amazon and iTunes and the usual outlets. Touring, I've just been touring. I will be touring through the year with Stickmen to promote that album, and also just because we like touring. We're going to South America in March. We're going to tour the U.S. in May. I think we're going to go to Japan in June, and we're looking at Europe later in June. In addition, the group I've been touring with this week is Alan Holdsworth, Terry Bozzio, Pat Mastelotto, and me. A very interesting group, and we toured the West Coast just before the NAMM show, and we're going to tour in Europe quite a bit in April. We have a pretty extensive tour, and that'll be fun. And not only because it's great musicians, as you can tell from the names in the lineup, but we play a pretty unusual set because it's totally improvised. No plans at all, no I'll play a groove and you play to it, nothing that simple. So it's very different every night and very challenging, and fortunately the audience is, I wasn't worried about the music, I knew it would be good. I was a little concerned about whether the audience would hang in with us, because it's a challenge for the audience as well as the band. And it's been great. In fact, all the shows sold out, and the overall comments are very good. People like it a lot. Some people don't like it, and they say that they don't like it. I get some emails about that. It's not for everybody. I like challenges, both musically, both on my instrument and with bands. So this is a really good thing for me, because it's a good challenge. and I love playing with good musicians, really good ones, and learning music ideas from them. So that's a good one for me. So that's what I have coming up.